I'm reviewing today The Return of the King. My edition got ripped because my toddler got her hands on it and ripped open the cover, but still perfectly readable. This is book 3 of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the final book in this box set I have the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit box set all together, and I'll maybe do a video on the whole box set next. So with apologies, this is not going to be a great video. I really don't have a lot of intelligent things to say about this. I'm obviously going to go ahead and film the review anyways, just because that's what I do on this channel. I film reviews of everything I read, but consider yourself warned ahead of time. I don't really have a lot of good analysis of this. I think that the bulk of my analysis is largely just going to be comparing it to the movie, because like everybody else, I was familiar with the story from the movie. I was expecting certain story beats and was a little bit surprised when things were different from the movie, so that's what stuck out to me. But the other thing is, you can see here, the way I'm holding this whole section here at the end of the book is various appendices and then an index at the back. So because I wanted to do this thoroughly, I did read through the appendices, and I even skimmed through the index. I read the introduction to the index, and I went through and just looked at the various names in the index. I wanted to do it thoroughly. But I should note that the appendices and the index are actually not for the Return of the King. It's the appendix and the indices for the whole trilogy. And to emphasize that, the publishers keep the page numbers the same across all 3 books. Keep the page numbers the same, meaning they keep them continuous. So this book starts off right on page 977, is like the first page of the narrative. And then, the appendices are from pages 1,351, and they're over 100 pages. They go all the way to 1,498, and then you have the index afterwards. So the appendices and the index, in one sense, it doesn't really count because they're not for this volume. They are for the whole trilogy. But I did read them because they were contained in this volume, and because I was reading them quite slowly, it took me like a month to get through them, and now I'm finding my memory of the narrative section of The Return of the King is a little bit foggy, but I think I can still remember some things. I can still make some observations. So it starts off with Gandalf and Pippin Gandalf. It starts off with Gandalf and Pippin traveling to Gondor, the Kingdom of Gondor, and in particular, the city of Minas Tirith. And it's got a lot of Tolkien's famously long descriptions of the landscape. And I mean, not only are they long, but at least for me, that they're quite often a little bit difficult to visualize. I find Tolkien's descriptions hard to visualize myself, a little bit hard to understand. But I was definitely able to get the general idea of it. And the general idea I found quite fascinating, and maybe even a little bit of a change in tone from the rest of the series. It's a little bit difficult maybe to put one's finger on it exactly. But I feel like in The Hobbit and in the first 2 books of The Lord of the Rings, the world of Middle Earth very much has a tribal feel. It's not a place with big castles and big kingdoms. It's more a place with little villages by the lake and tribes of people in the forest, or tribes of elves in the forest. I think Tolkien was supposed to have been a professor of Germanic, Anglo-Saxon folklore or something like that, right? So it's got this ancient, this Anglo-Saxon or Germanic tribal feel to the landscape. It is the impression I kind of got. But then with the Kingdom of Gondor and the big city of Minas Tirith with its huge towers and its big fortifications, I thought that the vibe of the world was shifting a bit more to, the kings and castles type story, like a King Arthur type thing. And I don't mean that as a criticism at all. That quite excited my imagination when I got to those descriptions. And I thought, oh, okay, so we're doing this now as well. This element of genre fiction is now also contained in this world. Great. So the descriptions of the Kingdom of Gondor and its history and the fortifications and stuff like that I found was interesting. So a lot of the lore of Gondor as a kingdom that is in decline, but still has all these old castles and towers and buildings from back in the ancient days when it was great. That's fun to imagine. Stuff that is different from the movie, like I said, that's going to be one of the key points of my review. Well, I mean, for starters, the Shelob the spider is not in here. That was in book 2. Things got moved around a bit for the movie. Also, the big climax, the battle outside of Minas Tirith, appears in the middle of this book. Actually, it's been a while. It's been several years since I've seen the Peter Jackson movies. But that big battle was the climax of the movie, right? I mean, I know that movie was famous for having like a bunch of different fake out endings. But that big battle was pretty much near the end, right? Here it only occurs in the middle. I should have known better, but I had gotten the impression that a lot of that stuff in the movie at that battle was from the book. Those big elephants and Legolas jumping on the elephants and shooting it in the head and with his bow and arrow and getting that whole elephant to collapse. And some of those memorable scenes from the movie, I thought, I had naively thought those would be all in the book. I should have known better because I saw the Hobbit movie, The Battle of Five Armies, and I knew full well none of that was in the book because I had actually read the book of The Hobbit way back when. But for some reason, I don't know. I just assumed a lot of those battle scenes from the big battle in front of Minas Tirith was actually in the book, but it's not. The battle in the book is described in very vague terms. It doesn't have every arrow that Legolas shot or anything like that as is in the movie. The other thing that surprised me is, the army of the dead, that army of ghosts that comes out at the key point in that battle in the movie, doesn't happen in the book. They do recruit the army of the dead. And then, let's see, this was so long ago that I read this that I start to forget a little bit which chapter it was in. But then once Aragon has the army of the dead, then the action switches back to Minas Tirith, and then we don't see Aragon and Legolas and the rest of them until they show up in ships coming in as reinforcements. And they no longer have the army of the dead with them. And it's explained in one of the characters, I forget if it was, I think it was Gimli maybe, although I forget exactly. He recalls later, he says, okay, well, this is what happened with the army of the dead. Like, the army of the dead helps them, I think, take over the harbor where those ships are stationed and chases away an army somewhere else. But then the army of the dead has fulfilled their oath and they get to dissipate. So when Aragon and Legolas and Gimli arrive at the Battle of Minas Tirith, they no longer have the army of the dead with them. So that scene from the movie with the army of the dead at the Battle of Minas Tirith was not there. Then, like the previous book, this is divided into two sections. This is a little bit potentially confusing, but it's a trilogy. This is the third book in the trilogy. But Tolkien actually divided it up into 6 books himself. You can see book 5 and book 6. So books 5 and book 6 are contained in book 3, if that makes sense. So once we get to the end of book 5, which is somewhere in the middle here, we go to book 6, which is Sam and Frodo journeying up to the mountain to cast the ring aside. And I found those sections terribly boring. I have reason to think I'm not the only one. Steve Donahue, in one of his videos the past month, made a comment about how a lot of people want to stop reading when they get to those Sam and Frodo sections. The lore of those sections is gone. The world building is largely gone. It's just Sam and Frodo together talking about how tired they are, how they don't have water and they just barely need the strength. They just barely have the strength to keep going. The landscape is also completely unappealing. Now, there's no pictures or anything. So to the extent the landscape exists, it's just all in your head. But it makes me think about how it can be somewhat mentally fatiguing just to imagine a barren landscape, and somewhat mentally refreshing to imagine a lush green forest. Even though there are no pictures, just your mental images do something maybe to refresh or to drain your brain. So if you're reading about a story in a lush green forest, maybe that makes you happier. But if you're reading about a story in a dark mountain where everything around is dead, maybe that tends to depress you a little bit. I got depressed reading those sections. The Mount Doom sections, the Land of Shadow sections. These are the names of the titles. And because I could tell I still had a lot of the book left to go, I thought to myself, oh geez, this is going to be a long read. I'm never going to make it to the end of this. But then that whole section ends much sooner than I expected. Everyone's seen the movie, right? The ring gets cast into the mountain of fire around here in the text, and then they are back in the Kingdom of Gondor. The Tolkien fortunately skips a whole bunch of the whole journey about how they got back there. So it's they just all of a sudden wake up and they're actually I think that was the same in the movie, wasn't it? They just all of a sudden wake up and they're in this castle with this beautiful garden and all these flowers, and all of a sudden the mental images you have are completely refreshed, and then I felt much happier reading it. The movie is famous, as I said before, for all the times, all the fake out endings, right? And those of you who have seen it in theaters, I'm old enough to have actually seen the movie in theaters, will no doubt remember this. You keep thinking the movie's going to end, and oh, then we've got this, and then the movie's going to end, and oh, we've got this. The book is even worse in that regard, although at least with the book, you don't think it's about to end because you can see you've got this many pages left. But there are whole other subplots in the book that are nowhere in the movie. The scouring of the Shire. The scouring of the Shire. So, this was not in the movie at all, but so the four hobbits get back, and they discover that the Shire is under this dystopian government, where there's like a police state has enforced the Shire. It's a little bit almost kind of shades of 1984, some political dystopian thing. And speaking of political, there are maybe some political hints in this section. So they get back there and they discover that the Shire has become this police state, and it's their fellow hobbits and people they know who are enforcing these very draconian laws. And so they say to their old friends, "Why are you doing this?" And their friend says something to the equivalent of, "Well, nobody likes these laws, but we all have to go along with them." And they say, "Well, you don't all have to go along with them. If you guys decide you don't like these laws, then you can all decide to change them." So there's this weird thing where nobody really likes the state that things have gotten to, but everybody feels like they have to go along with it. Which I think the political point being made here, possibly, is along the lines of, things are so terrible because we've all decided to go along with it. We've all let these terrible people control us. And if we all just stood up and said, "No, enough is enough," then we could just easily change things overnight. It strikes me that it's the type of political allegory, assuming it is a political allegory, that could just as easily be used by the right as the left. These terrible people are in control just because we've let them get in control. So who are these terrible people, right? Are they the Trumpist? Or are they the politically correct woke mob who have taken over Twitter? Depending on who you tend to view the bad guys are, you could take this allegory either way. Although, assuming that was the allegory Tolkien was going for, it gets undercut a little bit in the later sections because we find out that it's actually not just something the hobbits have done to themselves. It's a group of men. I think it's implied later that most of them are, or at least some of them, are half men, half orc. I think I'm remembering that right. At some point, some of the orcs and men had bred together, and so now there's some humans who have orcish features. And they're under the direction of Saruman. So Saruman, I don't know why Tolkien chose to give such similar names to his two baddies. Sauron and Saruman. Is there a reason for that? It gets a little bit confusing, doesn't it? But Saruman was the wizard portrayed in the movies by Christopher Lee. If I'm remembering the movies correctly, he was defeated at the end of movie 2, and he was killed off in movie 2, kind of. I believe it was one of the deleted scenes in the theatrical release, but one of the restored scenes in the DVD, if you buy the DVD collection. But that's another difference between the movie and the book. In the book, he is not killed. Gandalf offers him redemption, says you can join us and redeem yourself. He refuses. In book 3, we find out that the trees have let him go. And there's a scene where actually the hobbits encounter him and Wormtongue, who is traveling together with him, on the road. And they're just completely miserable. And Gandalf says to him, again, if you want to rejoin us and redeem yourself, you can do it. But they prefer to remain in their misery rather than to rejoin Gandalf. And Wormtongue, even though he's abused by Saruman, is unable to muster the willpower to free himself from this abuse and rejoin with the good guys. And it appears that this is going to be their punishment, just kind of left to their own misery. And maybe that might have actually been a better ending. I don't know. But then we do find out that they are behind all the bad things that happen in the Shire in the end. So that there's a battle in the Shire. The bad guys are defeated. Saruman and Wormtongue are let go. And Frodo forbids anyone to harm them. He doesn't want their blood on his hands. But then Wormtongue kills Saruman, and then Wormtongue himself is killed. And then there's another epilogue after that, describing what happens to Bilbo and Frodo, who both eventually go off with the elves across the sea, and Sam gets married, and all that. And then we get to the appendices. Now, like I said, these are technically the appendices to the whole trilogy, and well, actually, not only that. This edition here, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, has footnotes in the appendices where they reference what happened. The footnotes at the bottom of the appendices give the page numbers of the text where these things were referenced. So, for example, Appendix A, the Annals of the Kings and Rulers. So this is, the history of the kings and rulers of Middle-earth. Now, we've not gotten this history before. This is the first time we actually get this history. But it's been alluded to in bits and pieces all throughout the text. These footnotes here give the page numbers of when it's been alluded to throughout the text, and they include the text of all 3 books of The Lord of the Rings. The page numbers are continuous. And occasionally it even includes page numbers back to The Hobbit, which interested me because I know that Tolkien wrote The Hobbit before he was thinking about this extended mythology in Middle-earth. So it was interesting to see how much of this was already set up back in The Hobbit. Although, I don't know, because he did rewrite parts of The Hobbit when he wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? I don't know about it in detail, but I know about some of this stuff vaguely. That being said, though, the handful of times that there was a reference to something in The Hobbit, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I should check that out. Refresh my memory of what was in The Hobbit. And then I found that the page numbers that they gave here didn't actually seem to match up to what was in The Hobbit. I don't know if that was some sort of publishing error. What I generally did when I was reading this is if there was a reference to a page number within The Return of the King, I went back to the text to remind myself of what that allusion had been. But if it involved putting this book down and picking up a separate volume, I just let the reference pass me by. But yeah, the Annals of the Kings and Rulers, Appendix A, goes on for quite a bit, but it's fascinating. It's kind of the whole history of Middle-earth laid out, much of which has been alluded to in the text, some of which has not been. But this whole long world and history that Tolkien had created, I think, may be explained in more detail in the Silmarillion, however that's pronounced. I've not read it. But the Silmarillion, of course, was not published until after Tolkien's death. So for several years, I don't know, 20 years or something, this was all that was available for fans of Lord of the Rings. And then Appendix B, which is a lot of the same history but retold slightly. And there's just so much fascinating detail in here that it's interesting to read. And it got me thinking. I thought to myself, I wonder if Tolkien's reputation as a world builder of fantasy would have been the same without these appendices. Because with these appendices, you really get a full picture of the world he created. So, like, if The Lord of the Rings had been published without those, maybe Tolkien's reputation today would be much less. I wonder. Appendix C, family trees. Yeah, kind of interesting. Then we get to Appendix D, the Shire calendar, which gives the Shire calendar, how it was created, how it was used, the leap years, etc. Now, this is a matter of personal taste, of course, but I found this much less interesting. How long does this go on for? The description of the calendar goes on for like 10 pages. And I thought, why am I reading this? I could have lived a perfectly full and happy life without knowing how the calendar worked in Middle-earth. The sections on the writing and spellings. Now, again, I know Tolkien is famous for the languages he created. It's interesting in the abstract, meaning it's interesting to realize how much work Tolkien did on his languages, and interesting to see it all laid out here. To actually read through it, though, I found boring. This is one of the reasons why I made such slow progress on the appendices. I mean, I have been legitimately busy. But also I didn't find all of it inherently interesting. And then Appendix F, the languages and peoples of the Third Age. So despite being titled The Languages and Peoples of the Third Age, it's about the people as much as anything. Kind of a ethnographic study, is that the word? Is that the word? Anthropology study? I don't know, talking about the different races in Middle-earth. I found it moderately interesting. And then the index. So I think that's basically all I've got to say about this. And I am aware that this is the most surface level possible review of this book. I mean, you could, there's a lot of stuff in here that you could do a deep dive in. But I'm not the person to do it. I'm a person of limited intelligence. I can only just review the surface level stuff, and there it is for you. Having already admitted I don't have a lot of intelligent commentary, you'll have to forgive me for this. I am going to come back with some overall thoughts on the whole box set, but that will be a separate video.